Hello, and welcome to Coffee Time. Coffee Time is a space where magical humans come together for some real talk, strong coffee, and powerful introspections on whatever is top of mind right now. My name is Natalie, and I am your host for this channel and today's super exciting conversation. The idea behind Coffee Time is that you are in your favorite coffee shop, maybe cozied up with a book, and you begin to listen in on an intriguing conversation between folks at the next table over. For that reason, there is no big introduction. We absolutely let the conversation speak for itself. And if you do want to know more about these special guests following today's episode, I invite you to check out the show notes for more details. So, on that note, let's dive right in. I'm really excited to dive in. So, the first time I ever talked records with anyone, it was brand new for me. So I hadn't dove in on my own. I'd had one reading and I wasn't part of these communities. And now, I mean, I'm still like this baby in this world, but I feel like already there's like so much more information and it's just super fascinating. But part of our conversations that really sparked my interest was your background and how you approached this. So I would like to hear a bit about how the records kind of popped into your life.
Yeah, man, it's so funny with this whole spiritual awakening thing. It's just you can follow the string back so far, and it's trying to figure out like at what point in the string do I stop? Like at what point is enough information here? So I guess I'll say my spiritual awakening kind of started to happen when I was in a relationship with someone who I loved very much and was going through a profound level of weirdness that I was not prepared for when from the paradigm that I was living in. And slowly over the course of that relationship, I started to open up more to her spiritual beliefs and to some of the things that were existing out there, like past life experiences and regressions and those types of things. And shortly after she and I broke up, I was listening to a podcast featuring a man by the name of Paul Selig, who is a channel. And I didn't really understand what channeling was. And I kind of thought it was hoaxy, to be completely honest with you. And I was listening to Paul Selig start the channel, and his guides, or the people that he channels through, asked the audience to repeat after them. And so I started to say these words out loud, and I had this experience of energy in my body, and was like, "What the hell was that? Like, holy crap! I've never experienced anything like that." So I got really into his books, and we can just fast forward a couple years, um, just spiritual awakening stuff from that point on. And I go to one of Paul Selig's seminars, and I meet somebody who's one of my best friends in the world now. Just met him in a line for the men's restroom, and I was going through some things around that time, and he recommended somebody to me who he used to go get Akashic Records readings from. And I had heard of the word Akash before. I had heard of the words Akashic Records, but I really had no idea what they were. Kind of at that point in my life, I was like, oh, another option and another way that somebody might be able to help me out. Like I'm willing to look into it. And had a few of those past life regressions, or a few of those past life karmic links to things that I was kind of going through or struggling through that I had cut. And I started to realize that things were shifting in my life in ways that I describe as subtle yet profound, where I would be in interaction or in engagement or just kind of walking through my day-to-day life, expecting my body and my emotional body to respond to things in a certain way, and then realizing when something would happen that I wasn't getting that same emotional response. And I was like, there's something here. There's something here that's allowing me to kind of recreate and redefine who I am, and to step away from the fear and the limitations that I'm having, and to move into a new, more empowered version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly around that time, my friend, his name is Neil. You've probably seen him on some of these pages that we are on
Yeah.
Facebook. He started channeling himself, and almost immediately after that, just kind of got dragged into the records by his guides, and we're like, "This is something that you need to start doing, and you need to start looking into." And one of the first things they told him in the records was, "Your friend Zach also has this gift. He just needs to get through he needs to get out of his own way first. He needs to get through some of this stuff." And so I went through several months of just meditating and trying to access my records, and then realizing that I wasn't even using the pathway of prayer. And there's a whole formality into getting into them and the thing. Just kind of like walking in the dark with a blindfold on. Um, and from that point, I ended up finally reading somebody's records successfully. And by that, I mean, I had a huge rush of energy in my body that caused me to be like rocking back and forth.
Mhm.
I had about two words come to me that were with zero context, so they were almost unintelligible in the realm of actually helping somebody out. And I got a few visions, and I was just excited to have made contact at that
Mhm.
point. And from that moment forward, I just committed to this is something that I know that I have for a reason, and I know I'm supposed to develop. So I put myself out there. I started just doing free readings for people in the the spiritual sphere, and things just developed so rapidly. And over the course of about 3 months during the pandemic or during our shelter in place, I went from having basically no frame for what the Akashic records were to now I read for people professionally, and my whole life is painted or colored by the experiences that I've had. So that's a nice little 10-minute introduction.
It's perfect. And I related to a lot of it because I know when we were in our like voice memo marathon the other day, funny I say marathon given what we just talked about. But like that really reminds me of what I had shared about reading that book that I read, and so many of these different things I thought about and everything just clicked. And it's the Seth Speaks books. It's a couple, and the wife channels this, they call it a personality that calls itself Seth. I hope I'm explaining this properly. And then her husband writes down everything. And I think the understanding is that they have connected to Seth in some past life at some point, and whatever it might be. But this specific book, The Eternal Validity of the Soul, is just all about souls and how they experience and move through different like states of being, be it physical or, just purely energy and whatever, and talks about like birth, life on earth, death, what's beyond this planet, like all of that. And just everything made sense. And so for me, when I first heard of the records, that was what really clicked. Like when someone said to me, oh, there's your I know you might say masters, teachers, loved ones, masters, guides, being of light, whatever it is you want to use the words as. When someone first explained that, it wasn't like, oh, that's nuts. It was like, yeah, obviously. And it felt accessible to me in a way that I think for a lot of people it might actually not.
Right.
And so that's where when I mentioned to you, I went kind of 0 to 60 real fast. Like I hadn't ever tried to talk to a guide aside from having my records read the one time. I didn't know that I could talk to a guide. Like I thought it was just this thing that only existed in the Akashic records, and like there were specific people who could do it, and that was that. I
So
didn't know
those
what
are
a guide was. Like, it's like, okay, there's a guide telling things, cool, but like what is that? I had no idea. Um and it's interesting you mentioned like your journey through that and figuring out like how do I actually access them and whatnot, because I had a friend recently help me out with my stuff at home, which I could maybe explain in a bit. But she was sharing, she's like, okay, well, I already talked to my guide. So, like, what's the difference between that and the records? And like, my understanding might change in time, but the way that I get it as of now is like, people can talk to their guides or, other energies that are here to support them in many ways, but the records give direct access to specific things and information, and like a more direct path is the way that I've understood it. I don't know how you understand that based on where you're at in your journey.
there's a lot that goes into understanding the records. I mean, they're so expansive that it's really hard to even fathom. But so the way that it's been taught to me by the records essentially is, I mean, your guides and your angels and all the whatever you want to call them, right? They're always with you and they're always trying to communicate with you. And they can even, in addition to information, provide you with energy and little attunements and things like that. But when you're in the records, you are in some ways like the field of your soul. If you're in your own individual Akashic records, that's not necessarily what the Akashic records are on the whole. But when you're in there, there is, like, for one, a deeper level of access, and there is more potential for rewriting and healing. So if I'm in somebody's records and I'm talking to their guides, because I can talk to people's guides in or out of them, like when we were having a chat over
I
our voice.
noticed, yeah.
or a voicemail marathon, your guides would be like, oh, you need to say this, or you need to hammer this point for her. This is something that she needs to hear or
Mhm.
be directed to. She needs to do the pathway prayer, not the other prayer she's using. Make sure she knows that kind of thing, right? They can feed me that information. But when I'm in your records, all the I'm being all of the thoughts that I'm getting and all of the sensations that I'm feeling are coming from your guides in your soul and from your body, right? We were talking about a certain image in there, and I was getting physical heartache, and that was coming from the healing that was happening for you. And anything that is said or done is being guided and held and healed through that process. So if I'm in somebody's records and they're feeling a certain way about something, not only am I going to get information from their guides as to why they're feeling that way or where that comes from, but we're also going to be in the process of healing that, cutting negative cords to certain past lives, unraveling emotional trauma in this life, giving information and guidance about how to move forward, doing energetic healings on people's physical, emotional, and subtle bodies, right? So there's just a greater level of access to a person at the soul level and all of, you
Mhm.
know, phases in between.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. And I mean, it makes sense just in general from like the work that I've done in like supporting people not in this realm of, creating that container. And it's almost like a more formal container within which to create this connection and do that healing, as opposed to just, what I've been doing on occasion, which is like the pen to paper, which has brought some really amazing messages. And I think like we talked about like starting to build that connection. And like the other day, that was interesting when you said, do the pathway prayer. And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. But I did. And like the first thing they said when I went in there was, this is the strongest connection you've ever had. And I was like, okay, so all right,
Oh,
I'll listen. Yeah. Like just like straight up. And it was interesting because I was, I guess this is where it gets a little bit, well, you understand, but the energy came through, we'll say, as a woman. And actually, maybe I can pick your brain on this if you're open to it.
okay.
Within the records, can you, people might have different opinions of this too. Is it possible that other energies, not necessarily strictly like a guide in the sense that I'm used to hearing, would come through if, for example, they are like beings of light that are for your highest good? Like, is it strict what or who you can communicate with within there?
No, I've spoken to all manner of
Right.
things through
Okay.
myself and through other people. For, I guess this is a good one. For example, I had this, what a week it was. I was having this week where like I was in meditation. I
Mhm.
had a vision of like a dragon, and there was this whole thing where like my limbs were being moved autonomously, and I had this whole vision that was acted out with this whole thing. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Right? That was a little weird.
Yeah.
Went to my friend Neil, who can channel and who's also very talented in the records.
Yeah.
The next evening, he and I went into my records, and I was brought face to face with this dragon. It was a representation of my power, and I had to kind of like the night before kind of prove myself as worthy of claiming that aspect of my power, and then in that night in the records integrate it into myself. From that moment forward, I started to develop these other gifts that are outside of strictly record work, which was a form of energetic healing that is very palpable on the recipient's body.
Mm-hmm.
I did my first session on my friend Neil because my guides told him, Zach needs to do this energy healing. You need
Yeah.
to experience this. So I did it. He could like feel where my hands were inside of his abdomen, and he was describing these different parts. And I was doing like chakra work and all these crazy things on him, and it like helped him with some gut issues and with some back pains and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, we went into my records because we're like, GF, like what just happened?
Yeah.
And in that session, the energy that I had gained earlier in the week and that I was using to heal people came through my records and spoke to me as a conscious being, right? And it gave me like a procedure, like, okay, you just did this healing. It was amateur the way that you did it. Like, here's a way to like set up the session and to
Yeah.
do it, what to say and how to do it, right? And so any manner of beings or energies can actually come through autonomously and
Okay.
speak. It just
Did
depends
you
on what.
did you ever play Bop It? I don't know how old you are, so Do you remember that game?
I played Bop It. Yeah.
So it just reminds me of when it might have been on Bop It Extreme when you'd like fuck up and it'd be like, do it the same, but Bob better. And that's what it would say. And that's what that reminds me of. Cause like, that's how my guy would say it. They'd be like, yeah, good try. Like, let's do it again. Cause I get that
That's
sassy.
pretty much how it felt. Yeah. They're like,
Yeah.
good job, but like, not really. So
Yeah. That's what I thought of when you said that. Yeah, and like you just did on my eyes, which by the way, because of course we know, but we just did a reading for people who at some point in time will be witnessing this conversation. When I closed my eyes, I could see the hands when you mentioned that, and that was really interesting. And I like just for a split second, I don't get imagery very often. It's happened like the piece of paper was one. I feel like it's something I'm tapping into more. The other one was Egypt. And that was the day where I channeled that other language and like kind of freaked myself out. Um, but otherwise I haven't had images. I don't know if I told you about that. Did I mentioned it, I think.
you haven't had images before, or that you had that image when we were in your records?
The language thing that happened.
You alluded to it, yeah, but just like most of our conversation, it was like
Da-da-da. Yeah.
driving on a freeway and there was like a ton of roads and we were just like, are you sure you don't want to go down that one?
Right? Oh yeah, because I still have to tell you that story, and I will because it's a good one. Yeah, so it was this. I guess I should backtrack. Here's my spiel. So I first started attempting. I don't want to say attempting. Going into my records at basically the beginning of COVID, and I was doing it with that book that contains the pathway prayer. And so I started, and it was like pulling teeth. I'd get like a couple of words, and I'd be sitting there, and I'd be like, okay, like come on, like can. And I kept hearing this. Well, it was here. It was like in front of the left side of me. This static is the way that I explained it, but I inherently knew that it was voices, and it felt like it was hard to pull things through it. And so I'd relayed this to a friend, but the not problem, but well, I'll use that word. The problem with that is I was relaying like a very subjective experience to someone who has their own experiences in the records. Like they can only map on what they've known. And like for them, conversations would be like the records giving a ton of information at once and you needed to slow down. For me, that's not really what was going on. So I had spent like 3 months, and like you and I have talked a bit, like I'm a baby, 3 months going into my records with no protection or other energy work attunement going on in my life with this static there and trying to draw things out from it, which I did. I got words and a lot of feeling, like when you talked about like moving, like the first couple of experiences of like connecting with the energy of the records, my body would move like a pendulum does.
Yeah.
So I'd start spinning or I'd go in a line and it would just be like involuntary. It's interesting because I remember when I used to do that when I was younger and like not knowing what was going on. And I think my parents thought something was very, very wrong. And so like, yeah, I was getting like some words, and then, but it was a struggle. Then I did that course where we were given that other prayer and everything. And it was really great to, I think, be able to have people to actually talk about this with. And so they had their records open to facilitate at the same time. It was really cool. And I came back and was like, yeah, but there's this static. And it didn't take long before I got like very shut down, being like, that's not your records. Those are lower vibrational energies that have attached themselves to you. You need to protect yourself right now. And I was like, oh, great. So now I'm hearing ghosts. And then I got like really freaked out naturally. I don't really remember where the story was going, but anyway, whatever. And this was my like entry into this world, was like, I was all gung ho. And then it was like, hey, now what are you doing? And then I got terrified because, and like you mentioned, like how far back does this thread go? Like thinking to me being a kid, all these experiences I've had and things I haven't talked about, because when I was younger, like the only logical explanation was that like I had, you know, something wrong that needed like medical attention is how it came through. And like I worried for a long time, like in my head, this is how it came up. Like I worried I was crazy and I couldn't talk to people about it aside from a doctor, because what would this mean? But there was no medical explanation. And so I just ignored it. And like, I was, you know, aware enough to be like, okay, this seems weird, but like no explanation. This brought forward all of that. And this was only like 4 weeks ago. So
This brought forward all of that in terms of like emotionally and memory wise, like all of these things started to come back up for you. Like
yeah, and like
maybe
all
you
the
experience this all the time and you shut off the gifts kind of thing.
that and a lot of fear that I think I had rationalized away, because it's a lot easier to pretend that the thing calling your name under your door at night is not real, or like the man standing at the end of your bed who you think is protecting you but is not real. Like that's easier than acknowledging that these things may actually exist or like be here. And so see, now I'm getting the tingle. um like this brought all of that forward, and I think especially for me, because I connected so strongly with the records from like the get-go, having someone voice this to me in that context was like, well shit, maybe I have to actually pay attention to this. So enter my experience with Vivian. And so that that came up, and that was that, which was interesting because when we were just talking, you mentioned like a 1700s get up, and part of what came through with Vivian was like Salem witch trial days.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what that was. Oh, you know where this was starting? I just am rambling now. Was the channeling of the language. That's where
Oh,
this
yeah.
all started.
Yeah, the random language. Yeah.
Anyway, there's been a whole lot. But that part, this is all jumping around. There was an image of words, or like of a word, and I tried to put it down in English, and I
Uh-huh.
couldn't. Like I kept trying. I was like, this isn't making sense. So I actually closed my eyes and just let my hand go. And it was mostly letters that could be mapped onto like, what is that, English phonemes or whatever you would say. But it it wasn't exact. Like there was something different about it. And that's when I posted it online. And this was right after I'd had an image of, I think, what was me in Egypt, which was wild to me. And the word that came through is Anunnaki, or however you pronounce that. So that came up. But then the next time I went in my records, I asked about it. And they're like, yeah, you don't need to research that. You just needed to know it, like move on. So I was like, okay. But that was the first image that I've had. And otherwise, it's all just talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's totally okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the idea that we have 5 or 6 different clairs, right? 5 or 6 different gifts. You have
Mm.
their sentience, which is like the feeling, and that comes in various different ways that can be experienced like via empathy, where I walk into a room and you're like, okay, I can tell people are angry in this room, or I can feel that this person is hurting over whatever, right?
Mm.
Or it can come in the form of more how I feel it, which is, oh, I feel a chakra buzzing when I'm talking to
Mm.
someone. It's like, oh, my throat feels tight when I'm talking to you. Have you been having trouble like saying something to somebody that you care about that
Mm-hmm.
you might not feel comfortable saying, right? Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's clairvoyance, which is what you just experienced, is something I use as a medium for the Akashic records, which for me is just a lot of visuals in my mind's
Mm-hmm.
eye, and they're crisp and they're very clear and they're often very tongue in cheek, for me at least. There's clairaudience, which is what you're speaking to, being able to hear and translate direct words. Claircognizance, which is another thing that you probably experience with me in the records, is that I'm just sitting there talking to you, having a normal conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and they're basically downloading for me entire whole concepts, right? So it's not that I'm sitting here and I'm speaking to you and I know exactly what to say to you in this moment. It's like, okay, well, here's the entire thing that we want to convey to her, and we're going to give you free reign over how you do that. But here's
Mm.
the whole concept. Make sure you cover all the bullet points. Is how that would.
Interesting.
Um, and then of course there's like the funnier ones like clairgustance and olfactance, right? So like smelling and tasting.
Oh.
Um, and my friends like to take advantage of that one because they know I have those as well. So like I'll be in somebody's records and they'll be showing me like an image of somebody exerting themselves, and this is like the way that they think that they need to get work done, and like I can taste the sweat rolling down their face, and
Oh no.
I can like smell the dirt or the soil that they're digging in, right? And so it's this very tactile experience. I can feel the pressure of the shovel in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to, your body as you move through this work starts to become the receiver that it's always been, right? But that we shut off because we're like, oh, I'm just walking around in a meat suit, carrying my head from one room to another, trying to watch Netflix or get work done or feed my dog.
RuPaul's Drag Race. I'm a little obsessed.
For what? For what?
RuPaul. I've been
RuPaul.
watching too much RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah, and I had like avoided it for the longest time, and then I swear, like since Vivian left, I have watched like 11 seasons. Like it's highly problematic. Um, yeah, it's a
I'm in
lot.
a multiple
It's a
binge
lot.
lately.
Yeah.
Going back through. But yeah, so I mean, your body just becomes in some ways an expression of the work that you do, right? And
Mhm.
it's uh, yeah, and I think that's the end for me there. They're telling me that's enough. You've explained all your
That's
clairs.
so
Go.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're hard to keep organized. Have you, just because I'm always curious, like, have you noticed through tapping into the clairs? Um,
Mhm.
that sounds a little dirty, but whatever. Um, have you noticed anything come up for you from your past? Because I know I mentioned like, oh, the people in my room, that makes sense now. Also, still a little terrifying, but like I can work through it. Is there anything from your past that has kind of come through with a bit more like meaning or understanding for you since tapping into these gifts and the clairs?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for your listeners, the reason that we were brought together is by a mutual acquaintance or friend named Aloha. She
Oh yeah.
usually sends people to me who are having experiences of spirits or ghosts
Hmm.
or demonic energies or whatever you might describe
Yep.
them as, things that make you feel really uneasy
Hmm.
and that are lingering around or trying to tamper with you. I realized very early on in my awakening that that was like clearing those and helping heal those beings was a gift of mine, and it was something I was supposed to put a decent amount of energy into. When I was a kid, um, shortly after my mom remarried, we moved in with my stepdad into an apartment. We go upstairs when we're like viewing the place, and the carpet changes in the upstairs. And
Hmm.
in Arizona, at least, some of like the homing laws are that you need to change the carpet in a room where somebody has passed on, right?
Hmm.
So I lived upstairs while my parents lived downstairs, and so being a kid who was very receptive to spirituality or spiritual gifts, right? I had a lot of weird experiences. I would see uh, my mother come to my bed at night and like sit there and stare at me, and I try to interact with her and hug her, and she wouldn't do anything, and she would just turn around and walk out of the room. And when I talked to my mom the next morning, she would go ghost white and be like, I wasn't in your room, right? Or my mom would hear a woman's voice over the baby monitor and run upstairs and grab me and take me
Ooh,
downstairs.
when you
So,
get the all over chills, like, oh, sweet Jesus. Okay.
so that kind of stuff would happen a lot, right?
Yeah.
And my mom, I guess, has been like was I guess a victim to her clairs her entire life. Like there was no context for it in her life,
Mhm.
and nobody believed her, and so there was kind of that thing. So whenever things would happen to me, she would understand, but there was really nothing that we were talking about in
Mhm.
that year. So when I was going through an awakening and I really started to open up, and I was getting more intuitive hits, and I was starting to get like visions in my third eye when things would happen. This is pre-records.
Mhm.
uh, I was asleep one night and I was having a dream about one of my parents' cats, who is a real thick boy. He's a real chunker.
Yeah.
Um, and he's like he looks like when you overfill a water balloon and it kind of like
Yeah.
hangs so chubby. He's either sleeping or he's eating all the time. And so I was gonna feed him, and in the dream I could see that he was getting angry and he lunged at me. And I felt like literally against my leg,
Mhm.
and I woke up and I had like a red mark on my leg and I had been hit by something. And so I cleared my room and did all that. Immediately sent a WhatsApp message to Neil at like 4 in the morning. And I was like, as soon as you wake up, I need you to channel something for me because this just happened. And they had basically, they had gone through the whole spiel of how to take care of that type of business, right? And they were like, it's going to get a little bit more intense for you. So be prepared. Uh, but as soon as that started to happen and I started to get more visitations and I had to start working with these
Mhm.
spirits and move on and taking them to the light, or cleansing negative energies from other people's homes and that kind of stuff, I would harken back to the things that were happening when I was a kid.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. No, wow. That's very vivid. I don't think, well, at least recently, I haven't had anything like that. I had my little like pesty visitors with that gate that I mentioned, and like for me, it was I equated it to like I was trying to fall asleep, and of course, like people have mentioned to me, like when you're on the verge of falling asleep is when the veil is really thin, and that's when you're likely to get visited. And it just felt like pushing at my leg, like
Yeah.
kind of like gently, but like tapping. It's like a kid would go in and be like, "Mom, are you awake?" Like that kind of thing. That's all it felt like. So it wasn't much, but all I did at the time was just like reinforce in my mind that I had protection and like asked my angels to come in and help out. And then
Mm-hmm.
on it went. But there was definitely like waking up in the morning to like a definite like click by my ear. And I kind of like jolted awake. But then same thing, because I've been terrified like most of the last month. Like this last week, I finally been able to sleep like without a candle lit every night because I'm finally like, okay, a salt lamp is sufficient. Like, whew, I'm good. And I just, yeah, same thing. I kind of just like ignored it. But you're reminding me of the first week that this all started because I think I'd forgotten that this happened. And that it was Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday night, I talked to the person who I'm now friends with who came and helped me with like the initial clearing of my home. Cause like once again, I'd never cleared energy before. I had not done any of that. So I really had no frame of reference when people were like, just like protect your home. I was like, yeah, but what do you mean, like a security system? Because like I don't think that works here. Like Vivian's gonna mess with it. She's already been messing with my fire alarm. Like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that night this friend had asked her angels to bring me my angels. And at exactly 3:33 in the morning, I jolted awake and I swear I saw the same, I like in my mind, it's the same figure in the corner of my room that I'd seen at the foot of my bed that I thought was protecting me when I was a kid.
Wow. That's so cool. That's really cool.
He's here. So, and I
He says
shared that. Sorry?
he's always there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
he wants you to know that you are a lot safer than you think you are, and you don't even need the salt lamp. But if you want the salt lamp, that's okay. But he's like, I'm always at the foot of your bed, and I'm always there when you need me. Is what he's saying.
okay. So, oh my goodness. Um, this is the thing. So you saying that is helpful, but not but helpful. And it alludes to the other part of this. It was important for me was like, as much as from that point on, I've still been like terrified and like doing all the things and whatever, even though naturally I'm protected. Um, on my next call with my class, they were like, well, be cautious because energy can choose to present itself in different ways. Like it might, which is true. But I had to go back to the fact that it was like, I know I saw this, but I just kind of decided to go back to bed. I was like, I'm fine. I'm going back to bed. It was 3:33, which I didn't actually know the significance of that number. So in my mind, it's like, the witching hour. But like I felt fine. And I inherently the next morning was like, that was, I mean, the word I attributed was guide. Like, I don't really know. But to me, it was like, I think that was my guide. Like, I think I'm okay. And I just knew that it was okay. And so that was, I think, the first moment, aside from when I was a kid and wasn't really aware of it, where I've been able to feel energy and like trust my instinct.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes
And
sense.
what you're speaking to is really important, right? Just because it looks like an angel doesn't mean it is. If it feels like an angel, it's an angel, right? They can't trick your feelings, right? Because the things that would come to you dressed as an angel that are trying to get at your energy,
Mhm.
they want to like quote unquote feed off of your energy, and it's usually lower vibrational, right? They want to feed off of
Mhm.
fear or despair or anger or something like that, right? So in order to do that, you have to be feeling it. So if something shows up dressed like an angel and it makes you feel angry or makes you feel frustrated or it makes you feel sad,
Probably not
like
an angel.
I think it's trick or treating. I'm just trying to get candy. If it shows up and it doesn't even care, it could show up in like reef sandals and some long board shorts. It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Like it can show up however you want it to. And if you feel like an overwhelming sense of love, like when I was saying that to you, he's saying that he's always here. Like I felt this warmth in my heart and I felt like tears come to my eyes. Like I knew it or he or whatever denomination you want to give to it was coming through me and that it was an angel, right? So they can't lie to your feelings, but they can lie to your eyes.
Yeah. No, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Um, and I'm okay with the feeling part being how I connect at this point.
Yeah.
Because even that, like, and that was the other thing. My friend's like, well, normally they're not dark. And I was like, yeah, but it felt right. So I'm going with that versus it looking like a shadow. Like,
Yeah.
so
It's just
yeah,
too People are just a little too rigid about what things are supposed to show up like, right? It's like,
And I mean, maybe that's their only experience. Like maybe for them, things like for someone who maybe is more like, I don't know, I'm just saying, maybe for someone who is more visual, that's how things will denote themselves. Whereas for me, because I've been tapping into more of like my empath superpower, it's things that have been pushing me to trust feeling. And I think that's intentional with how, especially with my guides and that, with how things are coming through. Cause it's like, no, you can trust that. And like, this is how we're going to show you that you can.
mhm.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which came up also in your reading, which was
Mm-hmm.
we're going to show you, but how do you want us to show you, right? It's like
Yeah.
setting your own terms as to how they're going to reach out to you, which I thought was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which really put me on the spot. Like, thanks everyone. But, um, but okay. Do you want to hear the funny story?
Finally, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, because you got a feel, obviously, for how sassy and apparently dad jokey, which totally makes sense for me. They can be. That became quickly apparent. Get it?
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't ready. I didn't consent to that.
That's not good. I consent is everything. It's like one of my favorite ones though.
Wanted
So
a waiver before entering the podcast.
right now this it's staying in there. So like my friend who was over that day helped Vivian move on. We like had our little thing and on she went. Helped Joshua move on. That was really sad. I actually like almost didn't want him to go. And my cat was really sad too because they'd been friends and like all of that. And then we were kind of sitting there being like, is there anything else here? And this was before I'd even like been able to sense or been aware that I was sensing like pretty much anything.
Mhm.
And it was my guide. And I'm not going to say it out loud, but I have this strange sense that you can guess what color he showed up as based on our conversation and the theme of our conversation. So they were talking and like basically him being like, okay, like she needs to start talking to me because like I'm really sick of waiting. Like it's been a while. And some of the things that came through was so funny because I was like, that sounds like something my cat told me like through one of his readings. And it's because he's been talking to my guide. And my guide's like, dude, like get her with the program. Like what's going on? And they're all like commiserating in the background about me being like stagnant in my gifts. And it's this like ongoing struggle in our weird triangle that we have existing here. But so he was saying like, talk to me more, blah, blah, blah. And because I'm sassy and like you don't know me that well, but you're about to, my response was tell him to stop showing up when I'm masturbating. And, and his response was, well, I've never existed in physical form, so I didn't realize that was inappropriate. Like you got to tell her like she's got to start talking to me more and fine, I won't show up when, that's what's happening.
You gotta hang a sock on the door, so to
Yeah.
speak. Like,
So we made a deal. And the deal was like once a week, like whatever. Then of course it's like, well, how should she start trying to talk with you? He's like, water. And I'm like, well, I hate water. So like, can we pick something else? And he's
you're also a cat. Apparently, you hate water.
right. Which my cat's weird though. Like if there's like turkey bones or something, you can spray him right in the face with a water bottle. He'll just look at you and like go back to what he's doing. But so then she's like, is there any other way? And he's like, well, I prefer water. So I'm like, okay, great. So that was all just kind of comical because, I hate water. And it's like, really, of course, like it's a channel, blah, blah, blah. 2 days later, because that week I was like, okay, I gotta like double down on like grounding for one, because like I swear I hadn't felt weight in my feet in the last like 5 years, and I thought it was because I walked intentionally. Now I know that it's because my like root chakra like needed some serious help, and now I can like feel my feet connect with the earth again, which is a good sign. And I was at the park and I was doing this like chakra clearing meditation. And I get to the sacral chakra, which is connected with sexuality and pleasure and all of that. And like for myself, when I'm like doing my thing, like I take that approach. I listen to the sacral chakra music. I like do the breath work, and it's like a whole like self-care integrative practice, right?
Yeah, it's a whole practice, right? Yeah.
Well, guess what the element of the sacral chakra is? Water. So I'm like sitting at the park and that comes on and I just like burst out laughing. I was like, well played, guide. Well played. Yeah. So like, that was like our first conversation.
That was your first conversation. It was basically an argument where he's like, you need to talk to me more. And you're like, not like this
And then
motherfucker.
he's like, really? Really? Like, yeah. So then I was basically told, like, just kidding. Like, I've been doing it the whole time. And I was like, well, so have I. And it's like a thing. So that was,
I
yeah.
think you guys got started off on the right foot. That's nice.
So now you understand the type of relationship that is building here. And like why when some of the things came through in the reading just now that you were like, okay, like like funny and sassy and whatever, like I was not at all surprised because that's just how this has gone since day one of me being aware of it.
I totally get it. My guides are maybe not sassy in that way, but they're definitely like they definitely some of my guides have like bro energy
Oh
where
yeah, you mentioned that in our voice memos. I was curious about this.
some of the sessions like so my friend Neil and I actually share a couple of guides,
Mm.
same kind of soul group, same soul family. So we share a couple of our guides, and those dudes are very bro energy. I can tell there's kind of two of them. And at the end of one of my record sessions, they were like, "Any other questions?" And I was like, "Nope, we're good." Um, and I think they I think they said capiche, and I said bada bing back to them. He was like, they're capiche. I'm like bada bing, and they went bada boom, and then they just shut the records. Right? It was just like this very like Italian kind of like finger gun
Yeah.
vibe to it. I was like, okay,
ETL, yeah.
yeah, exactly. More
That's
like
special.
GTR, like Jim Tan records is pretty much how it felt.
There you go. That's hilarious. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I as I'm getting more into it and like figuring out personalities or however you want to, put that. I don't know the best way to frame it. It's interesting to be developing that relationship, which of course, as you just got a very big sense for, like I am definitely in the beginning stages of it, but already it feels like so much more solidified than it was like 4 weeks ago,
Mhm.
which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind since you know them on a soul level and you've known them for a very long time,
Mhm.
it's almost like deja vu, where it's like if you ran into somebody that you like went to college with or something like that, and you like hadn't seen them in 5 years, but you were like best friends in college and you see them again. And you're like, don't walk in on me masturbating. And they're like, well, invite me over at a different time, you know? Like then you just
Yeah.
and it's like after 4 weeks, you're like, oh, it feels like we've been friends forever because we were actually really good friends before. And we're
Mhm.
just stoking that relationship. It's always really nice to kind of like build that vibe with them. And my guys are always poking fun at me and talking shit to me. So I love it.
Yeah, like after that came up, um, because I didn't know like details. I was like, well, maybe he's from like Greece or something. Like, because we're like very like sexually expressive and open. I don't know, but I don't think that's true. But
Since you were talking about like personality and character, when you said Greece, I literally thought like John Travolta Greece, not like Baltics.
they were like rebellious, but I feel like in that time they were a little bit more stifled by the impacts of purity culture than like yeah, like is it Baltic style? Is that what you're saying? Like olden. I'm thinking like Sparta, like is that Roman? That whole time, not like now. Yeah. um, but it's yeah, it's interesting. And then you mentioned about the cleansing stuff, which I know is kind of why I got initially reached out to you, and then our conversation exploded. Because my mind does that, as you've noticed, and I'm working on it. But like, do you mind sharing a bit about that? Because like definitely my approach as of now has been like, nope, nope, not having it until that one that I mentioned where I just felt like it was just sad. And so I didn't really interact, but that was where I mentioned I didn't want this energy being in Vivian's closet because there was still some residual like heaviness that I could sense. And I was like, you're already sad. Like you shouldn't be here because this is not going to help you. And I don't know if I did anything, but in my mind, I guess I felt empathy, but like physically felt empathy. And then just tried to encourage, like, you have light, like, you might not see it, but you have it. And this is not the place for you, kind of thing. And
Mhm.
it felt like it moved. I might report back differently in like a week. Um, but that's been really my only experience interacting at this point, aside from just fear. So,
Yeah. So one of the things that I will say is, you're saying like I say no, right? That's good as like a start for just like, okay, I'm first off just declaring like, don't touch me, don't get in my field,
Hmm.
like stand there if you need to, but like no, right?
Hmm.
And saying it out loud is important because you involve the throat, and
Hmm.
it just creates more energy for that whole declaration. But the whole principle that I use, or the whole way that I understand what I call doing entity work, and I use entity as just a kind of a lump term
Hmm.
for beings that exist at a vibration that I just don't really want to want to be in.
Yeah.
Is that they're hurting even if they don't understand that they're hurting.
Hmm.
And so imagine when you're angry or you're depressed, like we'll use angry as an example, and you're throwing a fit, you're like pushing people away, you're lashing out at your friends around you. Some of you have this problem, some of your friends are trying to solve it, you don't want to hear their you don't want to hear them trying to fix your problem, but you also don't want to hear them feeling bad for you and all those different things, right? Like it's a very specific range of what you actually want from someone when you're angry. And that thing is to be seen and to be understood,
Hmm.
uh, and to be accepted no matter how ungraceful your shit gets, right? Like somebody walks in on you depressed or crying and they love you anyway, that feels pretty damn good, right? It
Hmm.
feels better when you're on top of the world and somebody loves you, right? It feels more real, it feels more intimate. And so there's a level of that that's there, right? So I communicate to them, right? Like I don't let them communicate through me. I'm not channeling spirits
Hmm.
and channeling entities, but I'm having a conversation with them where, if I've sealed my room and I've done all that stuff and something still manages to get its way in and talk to me, I just have a conversation with it. Like, why did you come here? Like, why did you come to me? Um, what is your motivation for being here? What do you think you're getting from that? Like, what do you think you're getting from that you need from me?
Hmm.
And usually there's some variety of, you have forgotten that you are inseparable from the source that created you. You have forgotten that you always have love and forgiveness waiting for you.
Hmm.
All you have to do is remember that that's there for you, and to accept that you're worthy of it, right? So it's, for me, a lot of the time it's helping them realize that they're worthy of forgiveness, that they're worthy of love, even if they don't feel it for themselves. So if something is trying to scare the shit out of me, or it's trying to make me angry, or it's trying to bother me, like it's trying to get things from me because it thinks that's going to make it feel whole. And it's
Hmm.
like, I'm already living in this shitty world where like I feel like the way I'm making this person feel all the time, I want reprieve from it. And so I just let them know, like, you might not feel worthy of the love that's always available to you, but I want you to know that I see your worth, and I want you to know that I love you, and I want you to know that I care about you because I've been where you are. I'm experiencing it right now. And even in spite of that, I care for you, right? And it's about having this conversation until they feel seen, heard, and understood and cared for, that they start to actually soften. And then you can literally just tell your or ask your guides, would you mind sending them to the light, please? Like they seem ready. And then it's as simple as saying that. And when I do that versus using all the fancy, like, oh, I'm going to do like energy stuff and like all that, it feels more final, and it
Hmm.
feels a lot lighter because I can feel in my body like when they're
Yeah.
okay, I'm done arguing. It's like when you're arguing with a loved one and they finally,
Hmm.
all their anger unravels and diffuses, and now you're ready to get into that space in the conversation where you can actually start to get to the meat of things and get to the healing, because all the anger or the sadness or the self-loathing has dissipated. And so you get to a point where you can actually do the real work. So it's just emotional intelligence, I guess, is ultimately what it comes down to, and then like a willingness to exert that emotional intelligence.
That's the thing. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that totally makes sense, and I appreciate you sharing that because what you touched on there, like the act, like legitimately the bells that I've been going around my house with and whatever, it's been um, helpful, and I think currently, at least, I do believe there's a time and a place for that. Um, the main thing it's been helpful with, though, is having a more tactile way to prove to myself that I can set these boundaries and move this energy as I come into a space where I can do it in more of an intuitive or empathetic way. That makes
Mhm.
sense. Um, because yeah, like when you've never worked with energy before, and like for some people maybe they can just go in and be like, oh, I just, move it with my hands and like see this light, but like not me. And it took the bell and stuff for me to realize that it's much more physical and to kind of connect with how to interpret that.
Mhm.
um but now I just kind of walk through my house and get a sense for things. um at least that's where it's at right now. And so like the corner of my room that we're not really fans of here. Um, but that's where Christoph stays. So, like he keeps it under more or less control, I think. He's asleep right now. Like when I walk over there, I can normally tell if something's going on. And it's that feeling in my chest and my throat.
Yeah.
And there I'll be like a bit more definite about it. But it felt different than like that day near the closet. And it was like, I don't think I told you this. I was walking at the park and I walked past a duck and I was actually on the phone with my partner and like they thought I was like, what are you doing? Because I was like, oh, the poor duck. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, it's alone. And I just had this feeling of sadness and like couldn't, I just thought I was like, I don't know, hormonal or something. Um, but then I realized after the fact, I was like, wait a second. Like that's my empathy. And it was a duck. And like that was a symbol a while ago. And I hadn't clued into it until that moment. I was like, oh, that was a sign of like my gift. Right. And so
Mhm.
now being able to go more based on feeling and being open to it. But
Your guides are actually saying that like clairsentience is a really big deal for you, and that's what, for example, you know how you free write, and that's kind of like your way of communicating to them right now. You're you're doing that because you're linking your clairaudience to a physical sensation, and you're so clairsentient that like writing it down is a way for you to build that link to your clairaudience, right? And
uh-huh.
there's as you buy into and work on the things that we talked about at the very end of that session, where I was talking about where I was at in relation to your records and
Mhm.
how to get deeper into them. When you start to work through that kind of stuff, they're saying that your clairsentience will become more fine-tuned and you'll be able to feel things even better, right? Because when we are avoiding the tough, like, I mean, you do your work, right? But when we're avoiding the really tough emotions, the things that are really deep inside of us, we're literally ignoring a sensation in our body that's telling us to feel a certain way. And when we do that, then we start to kind of, it's like one master nozzle. We turn down the intensity on the whole thing, right? And
Yeah.
it's like you take the glove off and you start to feel the experience of the world around you kind of raw, right? And so as you feel into those things and heal those things, like you'll be able to actually feel your clairsentient sensations more. They wanted me to share that with you.
It just doesn't stop, does it?
It never really does, honestly. Yeah.
Oh, no,
What I
that
listen
that totally makes
to.
sense. Do you get exhausted?
Kind of like in the I don't get exhausted like physically from it, but I do kind of just want to fuck. I just kind of want to remember what it's like to just have like a normal day, like a
Mhm.
day where I'm talking to somebody and their spirit guides aren't like telling me what this person needs to hear right now, and I can just be like, oh, it's just me having a conversation with somebody, right?
Mhm.
And I think another thing that actually makes me really really tired too is that like my senses have become so heightened from all of this work, like to be in the records and like feeling what you're feeling on a really deep level in my own body, and to be able to like, whatever, see a duck and cry or like, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it made me in many ways like very emotionally sensitive. And like when I was a younger dude, I used to just be able to kind of callous myself to that and be like, I just don't need to feel that.
Mhm.
That's not what a man does, right? And I could just live my whole life, belligerent to that kind of thing. And now it's like, oh well, like this is like kind of the work that I do, and like this is how I connect deeper to the world around me. And I'm like, holy shit, like my emotional sensitivity has become a lot higher, and I think I'm still
Mhm.
learning how to live in that world.
Fair. Yeah. Oh, it totally makes sense. And because like I think that was a funny thing when this all started. Someone's like, "Oh, it sounds like you're going through a spiritual awakening." I was like, "Yeah, but I already had one." Like I got sober. Like that already happened. And it's like, well, no, you can have multiple, and it's that process that you're talking about, and like realizing like, oh wait, this is how I can show up, and like what we were just talking about, being okay to do that to its fullest. And this
Yeah.
is like the next layer of that onion, at least for me. And it sounds like it was kind of like that for you, was like shedding that, like, you know, what you just alluded to, like toxic masculinity exterior, which I don't necessarily think is how you were, but like, you know, those isms that were maybe part of your norm, and realizing like, oh wait, like I'm a much more like sensitive, in tune person this way, and being able to experience that fully. Um, but like, yeah, it's exhausting. Like, oh my God. And that was part of like the cleansing of the house. Is like, I can't do this every day, nor should I have to.
Yeah, and
Right.
that, nor should you have to, right? And that's one of the big things too. Like, you know, my guides and the records. When another one of my very talented friends was in there, she's like, your guides are saying that you're doing too much, dude. Like, you don't need
Mm-hmm.
to have all of like the bells and whistles. You don't need to walk around your room,
Yep.
walls every night, and like go through the whole spiel to get things out of your room. Just like, just do the thing. Just have the conversation. Get rid of them. Just declare that you're clearing your energy and you're clearing your energy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to like, yeah, put on a whole Cirque du Soleil performance in order to like make your room feel safer, right?
Oh, no, that's like legitimately the message I got on Monday, was that. It's like, you realize you don't need those things. Like, your soul's been at this a really fucking long time. And like,
Yeah.
you physically are just figuring this out, but like, trust the knowledge that you have from all of these incarnations you've lived where you were aware of these gifts, because like that is there. You just need to feel into it.
It's like being a grown up riding on like a bike with training wheels, and someone's like, your dad comes to you and he's like, you know, in his old age, and he's like, you know, I taught you how to ride a bike when you were a kid, right? And you're like, yeah, but I feel safer with the training wheels on, you know, like I know I'm not going to fall with the training wheels on. And it's like, yeah, but don't you learn more when the training wheels are off? And don't you have like more fun on your bike when the training wheels are off? You can like lean a little harder into the turns. You can like eat shit off your bike and kind of have some fun with it sometimes, right? It's like taking the glove off and like living life like that again.
See, the first time I got back on a bike, in my like adult years,
That in metaphors now.
I couldn't turn the corner. So I feel like that is a metaphor for my resistance in this current experience. Like, no, but I don't want to have the tools. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, just do it for me. Like, this doesn't have to be real. Like, I'll just go back to my like ignorant life, you know, whatever. But like, that's not true, because that's not even what was happening. Like, when I really think about it, like these things were like, for me, these things were always happening. I
Yeah.
just wasn't aware to be able to, I guess, like step into my power in this situation. Because whether it is something where it is like, this just needs a firm boundary, or it's something where there's like healing to be done or whatever, like if I'm not aware of that, like it's gonna control me. And that's what was happening as a kid, when I was like so governed by fear of
Yeah,
everything.
you're living out of, yeah, like what you're saying. It's like when your subconscious steers your decisions. It's how do I? So it's living out of alignment with who you really are. It's living out of alignment with your soul. And as soon as you get a taste of what it's like to live in that, you can't go back. Even though you liked being a little bit more numb, you can't go backwards. It's like if you were in a toxic relationship with somebody, and then you get into another relationship, and this person is great at communicating, and they nurture your feelings, and they don't judge you for being a certain way, and you're like, okay, well, like maybe there were things I liked a little bit more about that last relationship, but those were pretty out of alignment, and they came with a lot of things that now that I've experienced better, I can't go back to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
even if there were one or two things that I left behind that I liked. That's kind of how it feels.
Mm-hmm. I'm just gonna try to fix this 1 second. It's a stupid camera, like focuses itself. Will it work?
Yeah. It was funny, you had your glasses off for the session, right? And about like 5 minutes into that, the screen got blurry. And for a second, I literally thought, like, are they making me see through her eyes? I was like, oh shit.
No, the camera focus, that'd be really cool. But no, I mean, maybe they can.
For
The
you.
camera, I'm not, my eyes aren't that bad, for the record. It's astigmatism. But no, that reminds me, and it's interesting because this came up like right before we even went into our session, but what you just shared once again, and I mean, it makes sense. It was a pivotal point in my life, and it was my first spiritual awakening, was like getting sober. And it reminds me of that. It's like, well, one thing you had said was that you didn't say it in these words, but like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like once things get good, it's like the bad's going to feel so much worse kind of feeling. And I remember early on, and I've shared this story before, like calling my mentor at the time like bawling on the phone. And she's just like, it's okay, it gets better. And I'm like, but that's the problem. It is like, because I remembered how bad it was. But for me, the bad was just neutral. And so now
'Cause
thinking about feeling that way again, it's like I actually have to feel it. And
yeah,
that was like terrifying and I didn't want it. But then as I progressed along that journey, it's like I can't fathom, and like we all have moments, right? But I can't even comprehend, it doesn't make sense going back to a way of existence like I was in, where I was like so detached from myself and from reality. And like, granted, I'm like, as we have found out today, always like learning more about self and soul and like what that means for me. And, that's ever evolving. And I think that connection is just going to like grow as I move forward. But I couldn't go back to what it was.
yeah,
It's just, it doesn't even seem possible. and
yeah.
and that reminds me of like that experience in particular, because it's like now, and I actually just shared about this, was it yesterday, was like how back when I was drinking.
Oh, dude, you're clearing so much stuff right now. I'm sorry. Keep going. Yeah.
You just like see it going.
No,
um
I can feel it in my crown. They're sending it up.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Back when I was drinking, I had two options. This is what I shared about. I had the option of life and I had the option of death. But the thing was, so long as I viewed death out of like this incarnation, or however you want to think about that in these terms, as an option, I couldn't fully live, right? Like there was always that thing holding me back. Um, and when I got sober and I got to the point, and I remember my mentor saying to me that you will get to a point where death doesn't feel like an option. Like where even in your darkest times, you won't think of that as a solution to what you're going through. And I did, like, because when she passed away, like that was the darkest thing I'd ever felt. And it was awful. And I was numb again and everything. But one, I didn't think of drinking. And two, I didn't think that I wanted to die. That just, it wasn't there. And what came with that, what came with having life as my only option, was I was actually given like an abundance of opportunity that didn't exist so long as death was there. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
You took one foot out of that door and you were like
Yeah.
fully living your life again.
Yeah, it's like your image of the doors opening and it's just like light.
What was that feeling like when you had that first realization after that had happened and you were like, I feel like shit, but then you had that realization of like, but I haven't considered death and I haven't considered drinking. Like what was that realization feeling like for you?
Hmm. It felt like actually felt, it felt like a warm light moving up my chest and into my throat. Like that's how I feel it right now. And looking back on it, it was like a glowing golden light. And I remember though too, like if we're going more into the thought around it, like it was bittersweet, but in the way that I kind of chuckled, because I was like, she was the vessel to carry the message to me that was exactly what I needed to get through that. But she wasn't here anymore. At least not in that way, because I now know that like she's here all the time. And that's been shared with me. And I think I mentioned to you, like I've now heard her at least once. So that was pretty cool. Um, but yeah, that was it. It was kind of bittersweet, but it was just like gratitude and like a sense of, I guess, almost bliss. I was going to say calm, but I think it was more bliss because there was more joy attached to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
That's amazing, right? There's like, yeah, there's like that sense of elation of like, holy shit, I've made it so much farther than I thought I did.
Mhm.
And it's almost like the option of death and the option of drinking are like weights that hold on you, right? And like now you've actually like you've let go of the weights, they fell off of you, didn't even realize, and you've just been climbing up the side of the mountain the whole time.
Yeah.
And then you look back down, you're like, wait, why does this feel different? You look down, you're like, oh shit, like I don't have those weights on me anymore. And look how
Mhm.
far I've climbed up in that meantime, right?
Mhm.
And I get the intuition that your mentor was actually one of your guides that like came as a person, like decided to incarnate and have this relationship with you, and that her death was actually the final piece of that lesson for you that she
Mhm.
brought to you.
Mhm.
Can you be in that?
Interesting.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That's an interesting way to think of that piece specifically, because in my first reading, which was why I like dove into this without any protection, I think I would have learned that in my early 20s, but no.
They don't do Akashic readings ed class.
Right?
Like everybody
No,
take a spiritual condom. Thank you.
my friend though, she was like, you should probably use protection. I was like, really? Why start now? But here we are. I told you get to know me real fast. Like if you scroll back on my Instagram, I have an open book. But the thing that she had mentioned was that like we had a soul contract and like she was here specifically to help me with certain things and that it was done and that was it. But that added piece of like that was part of it makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
I feel that, like, I think since then, it's been tricky because it, how do I explain it? It has felt like we are still connected, but I haven't known how to access that connection or been able to articulate it in any way. And I think the records and this understanding of energy and all of that has helped me connect with that more. And also to be okay with the fact that I don't know exactly how it's going to present itself. Like, because I was like, I have like the giant piece of celestite like beside me. I was like, I'm gonna put this beside my bed and astral project and like go see this person. Like, that's not. I mean, maybe, but no. Like, of course, it didn't work.
Plan, right? Instead
Yeah,
of it actually works.
it works exactly like this. Like, no. But learning through this has helped me, one, be okay with the fact that it's more fluid. And two, I think become open to possibility, which actually makes it accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think that you are getting, that you would be getting from bridging that connection with her?
Like, what would I get from doing that?
Yeah, because you're saying, wanted to know how to connect to her and I tried to figure it out and I got the Celestite and all that. Like, what did you feel like you were trying to get from that interaction that you weren't getting from yourself? Or that you weren't getting from just the knowing that she's always around?
That's loaded, dude.
Dude,
Um,
sorry, sometimes like actually one of the things that happens to me a lot, like that I've been told in the records is that I go into people's records like in deep conversation with them. So I'm kind of like, I'm sorry, but I'm in your records right now a little bit.
I didn't consent to that.
I'm
Throw more
sorry.
dad jokes at you. Um,
I have a story about that actually, about records consent after this is done. But
okay.
answer the loaded question first.
What did I think I was getting? I think, hi, Kat. I think one is it was difficult to, like at the time, I didn't know how to feel the way that I had felt being physically connected to her, right? Because like she was the first person that and it's not that I didn't love people before her, but like she was the first person I experienced like genuine love with. And then
Yeah.
she was gone and like was gone, air quotes for people who hear this on audio afterwards. Um, and I think it was me trying to like fill that void, right? Because I didn't know. And I think, and with that, like it was hard to imagine my life without this person and it just didn't make sense. I also, as I'm talking this out, I have to wonder if like, I mean, probably part of me knew that we were still connected.
Mhm.
And I just didn't know how to explore that connection. And so that's the way that I went with it. And especially because I was deep in, and I mean, grief continues like indefinitely, but I was deep in the grieving. It came through more in that sort of like desperate, like fill me up way versus just like knowing like she's here with me always. Like maybe we'll be connected beyond this, like whatever it might be. So it was just a little bit more frantic connection versus like self-assured connection, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's like a level of like learning how to communicate with somebody through presence that
Mm-hmm.
we don't give enough credit to in like, in like the real world, which is if you're having a beautiful moment with somebody that you love, like it almost cheapens the moment to like break that silence and break that, that loving tension and be like, hey, I love you, you know that, right? Or like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
so grateful for this moment. Or it can help and it can bolster the moment, but a lot of the times like that moment is so whole the way that it is, and there's like a level of you learning how to be in that relationship with her just through presence and being like, I can feel you here.
Mm-hmm.
like me feeling you here and like me feeling the love that I have for you and feeling your love for me is like enough, because there's nothing that you could say. Anything that I would be saying to you would be to try and like get to a level of intimacy where we could have this connection anyway, and I already feel it with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're good with metaphors.
Thanks.
Like I am not. But that, and actually it's funny you mentioned that, because I am one of those people where it's like, don't break this like beautiful silence by telling me I'm pretty. Like, can we just not do this? Plus I can't take a compliment, so like that's a whole other thing I have to deal with. But yeah, like I like to sit in feeling. That's just how I am. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nicer that way, honestly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'll tell you my funny story now.
Oh, I'm ready.
Actually, also that like I didn't go into your records on purpose. I'm sorry, I get
It's okay.
dragged in. And you're about to
You know
find
what?
out.
That's how I felt though the first time that like it when I was aware that my guide was talking to me, and I was like, "Excuse me, I'm watching TV getting ready for bed and it is dark outside. This is inappropriate. Like what's going on?" But then I was like, "No, no, we just have to do this." Like it just was one of those things where it just happened, right? So,
Absolutely. That is
okay, I forgive you. Yeah.
spontaneous. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who he's been a close friend of mine for about 6 or 7 years, and he's like he was spiritually open, but he's like not, he wasn't into anything like completely woo woo. Around the time my friend Neil was getting into the records,
Mhm.
there were a handful of people in his life and through extension, like through my life, that needed readings from him. This friend was one of them. I paid for his reading in January, and we pretty much never talked about it after that because it's a woo woo thing and it makes people uncomfortable. Um, as I started to open up my own spiritual gifts, he started to become a little bit more interested in it, and also because like it just became such a thing that was like interwoven into the fabric of my life that we couldn't spend time together and it not be a thing because it's just part of who I am now. So he wanted a description of what the records were, and I think he was like leaving my house one time, and so I didn't have time to describe it to him. And I spent a day like at the river with him, it's kind of like at a park hanging out. And I drive him back to his car. And at the end of the night, like we're both tired, he's about to get out of the car. His hand is on the handle of my door, and he's about to turn away. And he goes, "You never told me you still need to describe to me what the records are at some point." And about 10 minutes prior in the conversation, or 15 minutes prior, he was sharing things from his heart, like things that were like really hurting him. And I got the intuitive drop from his guides, like you could heal this in the records for him as soon as he's ready. I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," but I'm tired, right? Like we've
Yeah.
been at the river all day. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, he goes to open the handle, and he goes, "You never told me what the records were." And it was almost like I saw that he was being guided to do it, even though he didn't know why he was asking. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, well, I wrote this post on the records here. I'll show it to you right now." And I hand it to him, and I'm like letting him read quietly. And I just get this urge. They're like, "You need to do an ohm." And like sometimes I'll ohm in people's sessions, and they can like feel it in their body,
Mm.
and it's a very big experience for them. So I'm like, "Okay," and I kind of do it quietly. I'm like, "Om." And they're like, "No, no, no, don't
Discreetly, like, yeah.
just do it." And I was like, "All right, bruh, like I'm sorry, like I don't know how to describe this to you. They want me to do this. It's fine." And I'm like, "Oh," and I do the whole thing. And then I start seeing him standing in front of me, and like I'm seeing what I need to do to his chakras. Like I'm seeing my hand holding like his star chakra above his crown. And I start to grab it, and I'm like putting energy into it and doing all this shit. And I'm like, "Am I in his records right now?" And they're like, "Yeah, you are." And I was like, "I just own myself into some dude's records with like zero consent from either of us." So we ended up having this like 45-minute session sitting in my car, and it was beautiful. Like we got into this really deep healing. We were both crying. I could feel both of our hearts. It was beautiful. And we finish up. He gets out of the car. His chest is all puffed up. He's all proud. He's all happy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like so sometimes I don't even like consent to it. I just kind of get dragged into people's records. They're like, "Oh, you were trying to just hang out with a friend? Guess what, spiritual therapist? Well, like you're gonna do some work." Yeah.
I
Like
didn't
I'm
like that's the first thing I thought when you said it was like beam me up, Scotty, and like yeah. But like the way that you discern just connecting with, because obviously you're like, okay, yeah, your guides are talking to me all the time, and I was like, oh really, it'd be nice if like I could talk to them that much. Apparently I can't, it's not there yet. How the way you discern that from being in someone's records, is it like just from asking, or is there like more that points you to that?
It's sometimes I like in that case I asked because I wanted to be sure. Like there are some things that I want like hard yes or no's on. A lot
Yeah.
of it's like
Consent being one of them.
that being one of them, right? Exactly. Which apparently, the guys are like, we don't live in the 21st century. We live outside of time, so we're not good at this yet. I just kind of feel a difference in my energy and in my body. So I'm trying to think of an analogy. Like when you're like sitting there like at the table and somebody puts their hands over your eyes and they're like, they put on a fake voice and they're like, guess who? Or like the implication is you're supposed to guess who. And you can feel their hands and know who's touching you. Like, oh, this is my dad, or like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like my brother, or something like that, right? It's kind of like that. Like I'll be talking to somebody and I'll get a thought and it blocks out my other thoughts where like I'm like, I don't want to say that because it's really intimate and it's kind of uncomfortable and I don't know this person. And I try and like think of the next topic of conversation and I can't get past that thought. I'm like, okay, this is their guide telling me
Right.
this. And then when I'm in the records, time kind of dilates. And like when you're in a beautiful moment or you're like in a flow state and time just feels different to you. It's like that, like where we're talking and I realized I was in your records because like my crown flared and then like the room felt a little bit thicker and like my heart chakra was like buzzing and it's almost like kind of like heat lines or kind of coming off of things that have no heat coming off of them outside of like a strictly physics type of standpoint, and it kind of looks like everything's a little bit wavy and I'm like, oh, I'm in somebody's records right now. Yeah.
Okay.
I like feel the pressure on my skin. It's a whole like experience. It's hard to put into words. It's just like it's a knowing and there's other things that come with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
As you say, like I like reached for my ice pack because I had to have my air conditioning off for our recording and everything because it's so freaking loud, but it's like really hot here and it's not normally this hot here. So like my poor cat, he sleeps in front of a fan all day, just like basking in it and like
basking is the right word for a cat. Just like there should just be grapes hanging next to him.
Oh yeah. And I'm sure in a past life that was a thing. He's very like regal and I'm just looking at him and like in charge and sassy. Like when he was getting Reiki, apparently he was like, no, put your hand here, this is where I need help.
Like paw the hand and like put the hand.
Well, it was like distance, but yeah, she said that like that's what happened was he kind of like actually said to her like, that's not what I want, do this, like don't you know.
I like that you got your cat Reiki.
More than once. We yeah, we got a joint session done actually. And then he's had another one because he went to the vet and I worked on communicating with him when he was there. And like, I do believe I did. But like, it took a lot of effort for me to like do that. And so at that time I asked this person to do another session and apparently same thing. He was like, well, I don't really need this, but sure, I'll relax for a bit. And it was interesting because that time, I like tried to talk to him first and then I sent him on his way and then he came home. He was so relaxed the whole way through and he had to be there for like 5 hours. Wow. But he came home like totally fine and like left the house, just like went in his crate, didn't fight it, like nothing. So I think he just trusted that I was doing what we needed to do, or he was probably honestly like fed up with me being like, oh, silly human, like, I'm okay and I know that, but like if this will make you happy, I'll go with it, sort of deal. And so he did. And then he's also had an intuitive reading and his records read.
Wow. My friend Neil goes into his dog's record sometimes. Like, yeah.
Well, the last time I mentioned it, I jokingly, when my friend was here, was like, oh yeah, like one day I'll go in his records and apparently she can hear him, which she's never had with any other animal, but he talks to her. And he was like, yeah, that's what she thinks. So that's not happening.
Funny. Wow. He was like, I don't want you going into my records. Like,
he's like, you got your own. Like, yeah.
Yeah. That's super cool. Wow.
Right.
Mhm.
Do you have, I know we've been talking each other's ears off, probably more so me, I apologize, for a very long time. Um, is there anything like lingering that you're feeling you want to dive into, or that like my guides are screaming at you? Because apparently they do that. I'm kidding.
No, I mean, when you open the floor for them, of course they come through, and they. I was gonna say no, they don't, and then they're like, you need some time for integration, is what they're saying, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
once again, right, and they're not saying like right to channel,
Yeah.
although they come through, but they're saying like you need to spend a little bit of time writing and just kind of being in your own energy, even
Mm-hmm.
if that's sitting on the couch drinking some tea and like hanging out with your cat, right? Like just
Mm-hmm.
be in your space, be in your energy.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Anything from your perspective, not just you like channeling more information for me?
You know,
How are you feeling after all this? It's been a lot for you too.
yeah, I'm feeling tired. I do feel
Yeah.
tired. Yeah, it's not like I'm sitting here trying to channel all the time. They're just always coming through, and I'm exhausted. I'm thirsty. I just got a text from somebody in a work-related text, and I'm like, oh, stuff to do. I don't want to do that, so I'm gonna say no. Just all the normal crap.
Real life shit. Yep.
The real life shit. You gotta have that. You gotta be grounded, right? So no, I just want to say thank you for having me on your in your little space here and for trusting me with your records and all that. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. It's been fun. I've enjoyed this marathon talk, our marathon voice memos. And I mean, I know we'll be seeing more of each other in the virtual, maybe spiritual realms as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
As a wise man once said, totes my goats. All right. So
I was going to do the finger guns and the GTL. I just can't.
I was gonna Wonder Woman block your finger guns, like straight up. I was gonna cups of truth
Like,
that.
pew, pew. Yeah. That I can do. Anyway. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope you get a restful night. And I'll tell my guides to like stop bugging you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure they're saying things right now.
The last thing is just the Viking dude with the New Balances. He just wants you to remember that one more time, I guess. All right.
Trolling the, yeah, I know him. It's fine. Amazing. Okay, have a great night. Thanks. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Coffee Time. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if today's show resonated, I invite you to drop into the comment section and share whatever personal introspection came up for you today. Anything you can do to help make the show more accessible is super duper appreciated. Until next time, I am your host and coffee drinking companion, Natalie, wishing you a beautifully caffeinated day.